All right, welcome back. We're here to talk more about the resident application and interview and virtual processes. And hopefully you enjoyed the first segment of this with our special guest, Cassandra A. But we're not going to let her off with just one episode. We're back for more. Welcome back. You know, it's interesting. I have a high school senior applying to college, and she got her essay done, and she's like, "All right, I'm ready to go. I'm done." And then she's applying early to one particular school, and there's like eight other essays or questions that she's got to answer. And so I know that's been a topic of discussion for our application process. And I understand the rationale in doing it. I also understand the rationale in avoiding it. So what are your thoughts, Cassandra first, and then maybe Alexander?
Yeah, I think that that's an interesting concept of having a secondary application, if you will, something that really sets you apart. Because of this year not having the ability to have actual in-person acting internships, we don't get to know the applicant. We don't know how truly interested they are. We don't know anything about them except just what shows up on paper. So getting that secondary application in there, you can absolutely see the reason why. Like, we really want to get to know you. The other part is like, yes, there's a personal statement, you have your letters of rec, but after you go through about 1,000 of them, they kind of look fairly similar after a while, right? So just trying to figure out how to make this applicant look different. Like, why would you really choose me to come over to UC Davis versus like WashU? Like, what is the difference? And so I can see why you would want to have an extra application. That being said, in that 1 month period now that we have from October 22nd to November, whatever the date is, am I going to be able to read that many more personal statements? Not multiple choice. It's not a multiple choice answer test, right? So can I grade all these papers and get my rank list ready? I know as our program, we definitely talked about it, but that's not something we're actually implementing.
Yeah, I think when this first came, we were really like, that's a great idea because it's going to help distinguish the people that really want to come to a program versus another. And then I think for the reasons you mentioned, it's like, wow, it's going to be a whole lot more to review. And then on the flip side for the students, let's say I don't know how many programs they're going to apply to, but all 70, 80 programs that they apply to now require an extra essay or video or something. They're not going to do that. It's going to be way too much. And so that was kind of our discussion as well, was like, the application process on both sides is going to be incredibly daunting. Let's not try to add anything. There has been some discussion. I know ENT is doing this token system where they're allowing students to sort of give 5 tokens or kind of 5 roses, if you're a Bachelor fan, to the programs of their interest. I know Cord came out with a statement saying that they will not support that. Can you speak a little bit about sort of how that discussion went?
Yeah, so I think this discussion came back between ENT, I thought it was urology, or emergency department. I couldn't remember exactly where this came from. The idea was that a company was actually going to come up with this concept of a token, and then so that there, or a signal. I think they should call it a signal, because I think in other industries you can actually signal and say like, hey, this is what allows me to be interested. So if you think in effect also your AI, traditionally the acting internship was kind of like a signal, right? Because this is your ability to show that I'm really interested in your program. I'm going to commit 4 weeks to come and actually learn about you. So now that that's out of the equation, so now the question is, certainly how is that student going to stand out? Like, how are they, how will you know that I'm interested, that we're interested in your program? So I think the idea what we talked about with Cord was that this was something that was certainly in its nascency. It was really early on. It was a program that hadn't even gotten their act together, but they came up with kind of the idea, but not necessarily kind of the details, right? And we know always the devil's in the details. So it certainly sounded also monetary, like in terms of, well, if you have 5 signals and you can pay X amount to this company, and then they'll, put your signal out. So it's one of those, well, potentially in the future we can think about it, but as of right now, as it stands, this was nowhere near being ready at the time we wanted it to be ready. So that's why we came out against it.
Right, super tricky. Should we pivot a little bit and talk about this from a student perspective? Certainly, I think everything we've said so far is recognition of the difficulty on us, but the difficulty for students is clear as well. Do you think students will or should apply to more programs than ever? Any advice on for students listening about the concept of how many programs to apply to?
it's hard to empathically tell myself to be a student and say, yes, go ahead and apply to more programs, just from the standpoint of the program director, right? Because unfortunately, like, it gets lost in the shuffle, right? So I think, if you look at the AAMC numbers, and there was a nice slide that we actually, one of the speakers showed at the town hall, was looking at kind of the breakdown of, where your board scores are and where your number of applications or number of places you should apply to. And roughly, it was kind of a nice kind of setup, but the reality is we know that it's not uncommon for students to apply to 80 programs, right? But I think looking at that AAMC numbers, I think they said they broke it down to, like, if your step 1 scores are above 247, you can apply from anywhere to 26 to 36 programs, on average 30 programs. If your board score is a little bit lower, 235 to 246, you're looking at 31 to 45 programs with an average number of 38 programs. Below 235, you're looking at between 49 to 63 programs with an average of about 56 programs that you're applying to. So that was kind of like, if you look at all the numbers of how things work within AAMC, that's what kind of came out. But the reality is, I think this is where it's really important as a student to really get to know your program director, make sure that they know who you are, what you're about. Hopefully you're not just now jumping in and trying to say, hey, I'm interested in ortho. Hopefully you've worked on this relationship for a while, because the reality is I don't know, maybe this is what I personally think, is that a lot of times when students are interested in programs, I mean, how many emails do you get, Alexander, like saying, like, so-and-so's interested in your program, do you guys want to take a look? And, out of professional courtesy, I will absolutely pull this application out and take a look at it, put it through what we normally look at in a application. And if it looks like it fits, then it's in our maybe pile, or maybe it's oh yeah, we missed this. This is a great applicant, So I think a lot of this will still also hinge upon relationships. So I think, within program directors discussing program directors, or, faculty talking to faculty, I think this is where these students should really get to know their program, so that, when it comes to it, someone can go to bat for you and really make you stand out.
That image that was shown was really telling, because I think it was even in the sort of lower tiered, lower board scored students, whatever, their sort of number of programs at diminishing returns was still 20 less than what the average orthopedic student applies to. And it's because they've got there's this fear that if they don't apply broadly, they're not going to get the number of interviews, and everyone else is doing it. And when you talk to your classmate, they're applying to 90. And so you feel like you can't. And it's hard because, as program directors, we try to advise to that, but then they're still getting all this other information. And I think this year it's even more so of just, well, I have no way of showing these programs. At least the fear is I have no way of showing these programs. I should just apply everywhere. But I think your point about take the advantage of the fact that you're going to probably spend more time at your home program to really get to know a lot of people who know people at other programs, because that's going to be huge. I think the connections, the emails, the phone calls that we get during the review process from people that we know. And, our students, for example, are going to probably spend 2 or 3 more months than they normally would with us. So they have an opportunity. That's what we've tried to tell them, like, take this advantage, get to know everybody that you can, from, chair all the way down to intern. You want to be able to have multiple people go to bat for you.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, some of the traditional measures, such as letters of recommendation, are more important than ever, even if the interaction that we're currently having with those same students is awkward. It's different than I've had. Even the interactions I have with the students at my university are different than they are in years past. And so trying to develop that same relationship and getting to know the Washington University students in person is harder, yet my letter becomes more important. So just really challenging. I agree, emphasizing to the student that just making yourself known at your home institution is just a primary, really critical step.
Program applications is one. I think the number that went around when I was applying 10 years ago was, once you get 10 interviews, that's the magic number, because then your chances of matching, increases exponentially. And I don't know if that's still kind of the number. Does that number change now that we tell students? Are we still shooting for about 10 interviews, or because, as we talked about, they have the ability to interview at multiple places, maybe you should interview and shoot for a target number of 15 to 20? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's just an odds game, right? So if you get to the point of 10, I think the number is actually, it's a little bit higher, but not much. I mean, I feel like, geez, I interviewed 20 years ago. Am I that much older than you? Yes, I am. Anyways, but I mean, I think that was the same number we were given back then. It was like, if you get to that magic number of 8 to 10, like that's where you're going to match. So you were 10 years ago now, so it's probably in the 10 to 12 range at this point. You know, something just a little bit above 10, but the odds are with you at that point.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a learning curve for everything, and we are all, and that's programs and applicants, are going to be figuring this out, and there certainly will be a skill set developed. So the earlier interviews may be a little rougher, and then the students and the programs will get better at it. But my gosh, I mean, the key to me is you can only do a number of interviews that will allow you to be sharp. And that brings up the question of doing 2 different programs on a single day. And while it's certainly possible and certain people can pull it off, others will have trouble being alert and attentive and projecting their best self with a full day of Zoom. I mean, my God.
I think the other part of this, as we talked about, is how important the relationship is to be with your own home program, especially for the students, is that we hope that, and we actually encourage programs to actually interview your own, maybe whether that be on the same day you interview everyone else, so then the same pool, or do you interview everyone, your home program folks on a different day, almost to kind of give them a good practice run of, hey, this is how you're supposed to interview. I mean, I think that might be a good thing to do. But again, that is, you're asking more of your own faculty, you're asking more of your own program, but that'll potentially give a better shot to your applicants from your program, because they'll have a kind of a practice run.
Yeah, I think the practice run is going to be huge. And I think a lot of schools are offering this kind of, just so you can get used to framing yourself in the screen, making sure you don't like jiggle the laptop. I remember, talking about one of the virtual interviews, and it was by no fault of their own, but an applicant had their laptop on their lap, and it was incredibly hard to focus. And again, he was I'm a very active talker, and it was just kind of moving around, and it was a lot of, I got a little seasick, but those kind of things are going to be really important. What about interview coaching? I think this is a great, we all recognize students in person that we know probably need a little interview coaching. Those are students that are probably going to be even more at a disadvantage through a virtual interview. How does that conversation change? Because there's even students that would maybe good in an in-person interview that are not going to be good at virtual interviews, the ones that you may not think would have problems. Any tips about coaching for virtual interviews?
That is a really interesting question. I don't even know if there's any resources at my medical school for students to actually have a little coaching. I know there's professional development things for our residents. Actually, I think we actually have a professional development officer, I think, for within our GME, and they just sent out these great handouts to all of our PG4s about saying like, hey, this is how you guys interview, or for your fellowship interviews. So certainly they're prepping our house staff, but I have not seen any movement to do that for our medical students. And I think maybe it's incumbent upon us as in our programs, or program directors or APDs, to identify your own student, your own applicants, and be like, hey, let's do a dry run and actually try to go through it and actually walk them through an interview and say, this is how you need to prepare. This is kind of what you need to do. You need to have a nice background. You need to be somewhere quiet. With me, I mean, this is my Zoom. This is always my Zoom. I always put my green plant right here. So it's a little bit of a point of interest, So anyways.
Yeah, when we first started Zooming, I spent a lot of time online getting, there's all these articles about how to look good on Zoom, what to do, what not to do, lighting, et cetera. I think it goes without saying that we should do that. But I think the point is a great one, like the coaching about interviews and Zoom interviews. But I would also flip it around that, I could probably use some coaching. A lot of my partners could use some coaching. So the flip side is true as well. I think both parties are going to have to be patient, and you really look for content and character, not how good we look on Zoom.
I didn't actually think about that. That might be something we would actually need to run our faculty through if we're going to make them go through 24 interviews in a day. That's a great point.
No, I don't take anything from that, Alex. You don't need to put us through a multiple-day rigorous.
I've already set the wheels in motion. Got a 2-day seminar coming up, so get ready. Maybe let's talk a little bit. We kind of mentioned at the beginning a holistic review process, and I think a lot of programs we're already thinking about this. And I think with probably part of the framework with step 1 scores becoming pass fail, we don't have sort of our easy button to filter out students. And And I think COVID has made us even more try to get a holistic review. Talk about sort of what your process is and some of the changes that your program has made even before the pandemic and now to really make it a holistic process.
I think traditionally before we actually had kind of a scoring rubric that was something that had actually been vetted out in the literature. So we kind of utilized that for years and years. And then with the new chairman coming on board, he tasked our APD to try to do something different. And the interesting part is like our university is, as I'm sure many universities have been so forward and aggressive about expanding diversity, making sure that, our workforce certainly looks like the patients that we do take care of. So I think with all the diversity initiatives within our university, we certainly knew that we had to start looking into adding diversity because, our department is probably one of the least diverse in our university. So I think when we looked at that, we, obviously at orthopedics, you can't discount the academic part of it, right? You still know that you have to be able to take tests. You still know that you have to take in information and do well with that information, right? So I think for us, we still have, those, part of that AOA thing, but understand that not all schools have AOA. We look at clerkship scores, we look at publications, we look at, what medical school you're at, like how well are you doing in your medical school, that kind of thing. But then I think the harder part is your kind of subjective domains, right? So this is where, your personality can come out in your personal statement and your letters of rec, and I think this is why it's important that as faculty, we should actually, really pay attention to what we're saying in letters of rec, as opposed to just checking the box and saying like, great student, good job. That's not helpful. This doesn't give us a flavor of who that applicant is. And then, but I think that's where we try to gather some of that information, looking at, the intangibles, what you think is what makes a good resident, what makes a good physician, are they able to work well in a team? Do they show initiative? Do they show any leadership? Do they show self-motivation? What kind of values do they have? And I think that's what we were really looking through our applications this past year. And I think overall we ended up, ranking, I guess within our matching fairly high on our rank list, a little bit higher than we normally did. So I think, we have 1 year of data. So, the whole point is like, we're going to look through this and, objectively measure, like, is this the right thing to do? So in the next 5 years, that's our hope. So the nice part was we just happened to be doing that anyway last year. And I think that would be something that will continue on for this year.
Alexander, anything to add as far as what Washington University might be doing differently for a more holistic approach?
I think Cassandra really talked about a lot of things that we think about too. I think it's, the scores and the clerkship grades and the AOA, those are all things that we're going to look at. But we realize that more and more schools are going to pass fail. More and more schools are eliminating their AOA chapters. So we're almost kind of forced to look at some of the other things that may take a little bit more time. And it really is looking for the character and the values, and really sort of trying to parse out, what are the things that make this person that person. And I think the other thing is, one of the most common questions that I always get asked is, what kind of resident are you looking for? And my answer is always, I don't have a cookie cutter resident, because that would make our residency program boring. We look for diversity in everything with our residents, and they're going to be extroverted people, introverted people. There's going to be, really organized people. There's going to be a little bit more disheveled people, whatever, but we want to have that. So trying to get into that is hard. The letters of recommendation, I think, really, if they're well thought out and they really do a good job painting a picture of a person, they can be incredibly invaluable to that. Looking at experiences other than research, I think, is also important. So volunteerism is a really big thing for me. And I think, as Cassandra mentioned, a lot of the diversity and inclusion initiatives a lot of universities are already incorporating makes that easy for us to include as well. And orthopedics, as we know, is severely lagging behind nationally when it comes to diversity amongst its residents. And so those are all things that we're thinking about as well. We had some ideas last year, and we actually had kind of a similar experience that we ended up with a very strong applicant pool and got comments about how this is one of the best applicant pools that we had interviewed in a while. And then we actually very similarly ranked and matched fairly high on our rank list. And so we were like, wow, this is maybe really worth going into. And so again, we're just going to keep kind of moving forward with that. But it's I think we know that we have to do it. It becomes harder. It's way easier to plug in numbers and say, you have to have a 240 and you have to have AOA and you have to have all honors, and you'll get the number of people that you want to get. But getting into that more holistic approach it makes, I think, the application process more fun and gives you a better group to choose from.
Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world. I think we're winding down a little bit, but I want to circle back to where one of the early points Cassandra made, which is regarding diversity initiatives. And you mentioned that UC Davis had a university diversity kind of open house. And what's your thought? Is this process going to make it more challenging or perhaps even more straightforward to increase diversity at your program or within orthopedics? Any thoughts or any general trends that you've heard about that concept?
I know initially when we started off on this, I think in general, we were concerned that there's certain applicants, specifically maybe diversity and inclusion type initiatives, that might get lost in the system, get lost in the shuffle. But I think if anything, I think with such an emphasis at my university and really having that open house, it seemed really successful actually. Like it almost seems like it's easier this year to really push forward any diversity and inclusion initiatives. I don't know if it just happens to be, that's just what I'm seeing, but I think the atypical applicant or, the diverse applicant is almost has a better platform in reaching out. I feel like social media certainly has opened up those doors. And I think just how my university is just opening it up and trying to make it easy and accessible certainly seems to be much more successful this year. I mean, I know that we've had offices of diversity and inclusion for years, and I know that there's been times where we've actually brought students to campus for a second look, but it definitely was not something that was kind of in the forefront for orthopedics. And then with this year, with this open house, having that virtual platform, it gave us a spot at the table like that we just didn't have before. So I think if anything, it opens up doors and it made it easier.
Our concern was that with virtual recruitment, virtual interviews, that students, especially underrepresented minorities or women applicants in orthopedics, would have a harder time kind of distinguishing themselves. But our university has very similar kind of university-wide initiatives. They do a special program for underrepresented minorities that's multiple departments. And last year we had a pretty big undertaking in it and had pretty good representation from faculty and residents. And actually two of our current interns participated in that. And so that was great because that was all the proof that we needed. And both said that was a big reason why they chose to rank WashU highly. So I think not only department-led initiatives, but university-led initiatives can go such a long way. And I think with social media, it becomes a lot easier for students to really sort of let themselves be heard. And so I've actually seen a huge number of applicants, both women and underrepresented minorities, reach out to us through Twitter, through just sort of saying, hey, look at me, I'm an orthopedic applicant, which they may have not had that platform a couple of years ago. I think it's like kind of the perfect storm of all the social justice initiatives going on nationally. I think the AOA has become more aware of it, and that's become a critical mission of the AOA over the last year, and program directors are talking about it. And the more that we all share ideas and the more that we kind of cross-pollinate with these ideas, the better it'll be. So I think it's been surprisingly good to see the number of applicants and number of students that are kind of showing themselves.
So Cassandra, what about taking what you know? And you have great students at UC Davis, and those students. Wouldn't it just be easier just to take a large chunk of your incoming class from your own students?
I think that might be a possibility, but I think we're still very much dedicated to being diverse also from a geographic standpoint. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, we're not just talking about underrepresented minorities and female applicants, we're also talking about applicants across the country. I don't want to be that program that I only take people from Northern California. So I think it is the lowest activation energy, if you will, but I think it's still very important to create a class that actually has a lot of diverse input and diverse kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Just how they look at things, right? Because if students from the East Coast are going to be definitely different than students from the Midwest or West Coast. So we definitely want that diversity in how they look at things.
Yeah, and the med school experiences and the early, training experiences, all that matters. And I was obviously it was a little tongue in cheek, but it would be easy just to take the students that but I don't think in the end that would make the best class. I think we all recognize that. Alexander, anything to add?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think Cassandra, you made the point, and I think it's well taken that we want to stay true to our culture. We want to stay true to what we think makes each of our residency programs the special places that they are, and part of that is not having all of our students come from our home program, and so we want to maintain that. And I think that's I think all programs I think feel that way, and I think we've all kind of come to that as like, all right, we know it's gonna be more challenging, but we want to maintain why we think our programs are so great, because there's a lot of great programs out there. I think it's awesome to see just how we've kind of collectively come together, especially through CORD the last few months, to really kind of galvanize CORD. It really has, to see what's coming out, the ideas, the crosstalk that we've had. It's been really cool.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how COVID has changed so many things in our society, and collaborations now exist that didn't exist before, whether that's locally or nationally. And I agree, like conversations like this are so welcome, and we've covered an incredible amount of ground. And Cassandra, we are grateful that you took the time to join us and share your knowledge and experience, because I really think it'll be helpful for others. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this discussion.
Yeah, and I think that for all of you listeners who are CORD members or are at an institution that's a CORD member, you really should check out the town hall, which goes over this in detail, and the recording has slides that are informational as well. So another resource for those of you who want a little different slant on many of the topics that we discussed tonight. Alexander, any closing comments?
No, again, Cassandra, thank you so much. I think this is an amazing discussion, and I will reiterate the webinar in the town hall that you moderated was absolutely fantastic and just had so much great information. And it's great to establish these collaborations and keep making orthopedics the greatest specialty out there.
Outstanding. You guys have a good night, okay?
Thank you.
Thanks.
You too.
Thank you.